you very much, Nick. I hope everybody can see the slides there, if I've done that correctly, and I hope you can hear me. Yeah, as Nick said, I am working the campaigns and public affairs and policy team at the NRLA, and very pleased to have been invited today to give a bit of an overview of what the NRLA has been doing in terms of our campaigning on the bill, obviously with a focus on the impact on student tenancies and student landlords. Oh, sorry, I'll try and move my slides on. There we go. So just to give a bit of an overview first, I'm sure you're all very much engaged with the bill and what it contains, what it doesn't. But very quickly, a run through of some of the key provisions of the bill and what they might come once it's implemented. The bill broadly mirrors what was in the white paper a year ago, so there weren't too many surprises on that front. And as you can see here on the slide, it really points to increasing security and stability for tenants. And the way it is proposed to do that is through the abolition of Section 21. It proposes to get rid of assured tenancies, so we will get open-ended or periodic tenancies. It provides for tenants to give 2 months' notice at any point in time, and there will be a requirement for a legal requirement for a written statement, so effectively a written tenancy agreement, which I'm sure most of you do anyway. The bill also contains some amendments to Section 8 grounds for possession. So there's a few new grounds, there's some amendments to existing grounds. I'll cover a couple of those later on. And there are provisions in the bill around dispute resolution, a requirement for landlords to join a redress scheme, and register with a property portal to ensure better compliance. There is also, somewhat contentiously amongst our members, now a legal right, or there will be a legal right for tenants to request pets, not to accept pets, but just to request pets. So quickly running through when this is all likely to come in, I should say, obviously this is a bill, this is not legislation, it's draft legislation, and it's still very much in the early stages. We don't yet, I think I saw a question already on when, whether we have a date for second reading. We don't. It was published and had its first reading back in May, but as yet we haven't got a date for the second reading. They're cutting it very fine to do that before summer recess. The House rises, I think, on the 20th of July. And I think formally they are required to give around 2 weeks notice of second reading. So they are running out of time to get that done before summer recess. We then have a very short period of time after summer recess before we're on to conference recess. So you can see how time is sort of slipping away into 2023. So the likelihood that this will receive royal assent this year is pretty minimal. It is very indicative. We don't have precise clarity on any timings, but the NRLA is sort of working to a spring 2024 royal assent. We think that's relatively realistic and probably what's likely. But even when it is on the statute book, when it receives royal assent, it doesn't immediately come into force. So it's expected that we'll get a 6-month period following royal assent before the provisions of the bill apply to new tenancies, and a further 18 months to apply to existing tenancies. So while there is a lot of uncertainty around the content of the bill, timing wise, there's not anything kind of immediately to panic about. And of course, there is still time for us to influence and shape the content of the bill too. So just running through a couple of the kind of key changes. I will come on to students and how the bill is going to affect that. But just to explain, the bill will abolish Section 21, the so-called no-fault evictions, and is proposed to move to regime of open-ended periodic tenancies, and clearly that has a particular impact on the ability of student landlords to ensure possession and availability for incoming tenants. What that means is that all landlords will be relying on Section 8 notices to get possession, and there are a number of amendments to those, and effectively grounds will need to be cited in every case of a possession. Another change really is around the ability of tenants to give notice at any point. So at the moment, the bill will enable a tenant to move in and immediately serve 2 months notice. That's something, again, I'll come on to later, because that's a key, one of our key calls that we're trying to get amended. None of this, or rather, student landlords are not exempt from this regime. We had been hoping for some form of exemption for student landlords. We didn't get anything like that in the bill, which was extremely disappointing. But we are working really closely, and I'll come on to this, but we're working really closely with government and officials to ensure that amendments are brought forward that enable student landlords to continue to operate on that annual cycle. So just quickly going through a couple of the new grounds for possession. Of note, really, there are new grounds proposed around moving into property, selling, and repeated rent arrears, which is all, you know, good news for landlords, though I appreciate perhaps less so for student landlords. The bill also amends, which is doesn't sound particularly significant, but actually in practical terms it really is, around antisocial behaviour. It just reduces the threshold required in terms of evidence for antisocial behaviour. So it changes the wording such that behaviour only has to be capable of causing nuisance rather than likely to. So again, it's a slightly pedantic change, but it is a kind of beneficial one if you're dealing with ASB or nuisance behaviour of any kind. What the bill doesn't cover is any kind of court reform. Now, the NRLA were very clear in our lobbying around the bill and reform per se. We have been very clear that court reform needs to happen before abolition of Section 21. And this is something, it's one of our kind of key priority areas, really, that we need to get in place before we lose Section 21, so that we can have assurance that the courts can deal with and process the increase in claims that they'll be getting, including timeframes, adequate timeframes in seeking possession. We're calling for prioritisation of claims in instances where there's antisocial behaviour or significant rent arrears, and digitisation of the process to just streamline things and take some pressure off the court system. So that's a kind of key area of focus over the next coming weeks and months. I will quickly run through these. I'm not going to dwell on landlord redress per se, but suffice to say, all landlords will be required to join a redress scheme to deal with any kind of complaints from former or prospective tenants, and local authorities will be able to take enforcement action if landlords fail to join an approved scheme. So that is likely to materialise when the bill is enacted. Likewise, there are powers within the bill to require landlords to register on a property portal. So this would be effectively a database of private rented sector. There is very little detail in the bill on what exactly the portal would include, and the NRLA is working quite hard to make sure that it doesn't create an extra layer of bureaucracy, that we, in having a portal, that the necessity for licensing is removed, and that the portal enables things like information sharing, and sort of accessibility between local authorities, police, government, and just kind of facilitates rather than hinders any workings there. It is proposed that it will be helpful in terms of compliance, improving compliance. So we're yet to see sort of precise detail on that at the moment, but yeah, likewise, that's afoot. Pets, as I said, the bill it effectively will entitle a tenant to a legal right to request a pet. That doesn't mean that a landlord has to accept a pet. Certainly in the case of student accommodation, you know, it will be perfectly justifiable to refuse such a request, you know, on the basis of the impact on other tenants. But yeah, this is an area that was lobbied hard for and has been retained in the bill. So coming on to student landlords and really how the bill is going to affect them, I'm afraid as it's drafted, it is not likely to make life easier. The bill, as I said, is going to abolish short hold tenancies and fixed terms. So tenancies will be open-ended until either a tenant serves notice. As I said, they can do that at any point in time at the moment, just giving 2 months notice, or a landlord uses a Section 8 notice to end the tenancy. And at the moment, as the bill stands, there is no ground proposed in Section 8 to enable a student landlord from seeking possession on the basis that the property is needed for incoming tenants the following year. There's been a lot of discussion around whether purpose-built student accommodation is affected by this. It is not affected by this, but not because it's been excluded from the Renters Reform Bill per se. PBSA operates on a non-Housing Act tenancies, so they do not operate on an AST regime. They operate on a licensing regime, and as such, they aren't affected by the proposals in the bill, or most of them. So they will continue to operate fixed-term licenses, which will enable them to continue that cyclical functionality. What does this really mean? So effectively, you will be entering into open-ended contracts at the start of the academic year, and because of the abilities now for tenants to end a tenancy, there's likely to be quite difficult decisions. For instance, if a tenant leaves midway through an academic year, if a new student tenant can't be found, landlords are likely to be looking at either void periods or looking to professional sharers to fill vacant rooms, or looking to let to single household units, which of course, if there are Article 4 directions in place, will make it difficult to, well, impossible to re-let to students the following year. I should add that there are complications. You may have seen the minister a couple of weeks ago suggesting that voids will be easy to fill because landlords can just let to professional sharers. There's no provision in the bill to enable a student landlord to serve notice on a non-student tenant. So if you are looking to fill a void with a non-student tenant, you cannot be guaranteed that the property will be available the following year. As I said, not much good news in the bill for student landlords. So what are we doing? We are proposing that we have a mandatory prior notice ground for possession. So this would require landlords to inform the tenant in writing at the start of the tenancy that they are likely to need to regain possession. It would be a 2-month notice, and we are in the process of working with DLUC really around the detail on how that ground would be served, and the kind of window of opportunity to serve that notice. We are also calling for it to be applicable to non-students residing in student property. So I was just mentioning there, if you've got a void and let to a non-student, we're proposing that this ground would be able to be served to that non-student as well. Aside from the ground, we're also calling for a moratorium on tenants serving notice. So this would apply to all tenants, not just student tenants. And this would be a period of 4 months from the start of the tenancy in which a tenant wouldn't be able to serve 2 months notice. But upon expiry of that 4 months, they would be able to serve a notice at any time. So effectively, what that would mean is a minimum 6-month tenancy, which I appreciate does not go, certainly doesn't solve the problems of not having a fixed term tenancy in place. But I think that our thinking is that it does afford landlords a 6-month minimum certainty over a tenancy, and that's something that we think is justifiable on a cost recovery kind of basis, that landlords need that certainty and the mitigation of frequent reletting costs. So that's something that we're calling for as well. So those two things together, we are pretty confident that we're getting traction on, certainly the ground. But I appreciate that a lot of you may be thinking that, it doesn't create a perfect solution. And I think we're pretty clear that it doesn't, I'm afraid. It goes some way to alleviating some of the problems. But fixed term tenancies, it's going to be difficult to really get anywhere close to solving that problem of not having fixed terms. So our progress to date, we've been working really hard on this really since last year in real earnest terms. We've been engaging with government regularly, weekly, on this, and have participated in their roundtables where they've been seeking to establish really what needs to be done, what the solution is to this. The latest of those roundtables was just a couple of weeks ago, and we are really trying to, we're convening a joint letter from all the stakeholders that you can see on the screen there and others, so that we've got sector backing on our recommendations, and we'll be sending that letter to the Minister next week. In terms of next steps, really we've submitted a formal response to the bill. So that's something that we've just recently done, and that outlines all our calls that I've mentioned here, particularly on the student side, and provides an assessment of the provisions of the bill, their likely impact on functionality of the sector and sustainment in terms of supply. We're currently awaiting a package of amendments. So I said that we haven't got a date for second reading. When we do get that date, what we're anticipating is a package of amendments, one of which we hope, or several of which, will be around the ground and hopefully the moratorium. Until we get that, really our engagement is ensuring that we've got the sort of industry backing on this, and working to highlight the experiences in Scotland after the PRT was introduced, and the impact that that's had on student experiences and supply and investment in the sector. So just a quick point on missing elements from the bill, as well as our sort of disappointment on the student side. The bill doesn't include anything on the decent home standard that was promised in the white paper, and a couple of other things there about renting to parents, children in receipt of those in receipt of benefits. The government confirmed just yesterday that they will be bringing forward legislation on the decent home standard. So that's something that we're anticipating again relatively soon. It's the usual phrase of, I think, when parliamentary time allows, but that will be something that's coming as well along the line. We have developed a hub which you can access by clicking through onto that QR code there. This provides a summary, FAQs, and updates and progress on the bill. also on that hub, I would really encourage you to look at our MP letter toolkits. We've developed a number of template letters, one of which is on student tenancies, that you can edit or just download and send to your MP. And yeah, I'd really encourage, if you have 5 minutes, you can do it all via our website. You can log in, it will automatically find your MP, and you can send that to them. So that just sets out everything I've covered really in terms of what we're calling for, and is a really good way to alert your MP to your concerns and to what's needed and what we need on this. I think that is probably everything I'm going to say for now, but I can see that lots of questions have come in, Nick, so I don't know if you want to delve into those.
Yeah, you're right, Ellie. We have had a number of questions. Just before we get on to the questions, one thing that I think would be really helpful. So you talked about the two things the NRLA are really sort of trying to achieve to make this thing better. Can you just explain to our audience, why you've gone for those two things? Is it because you feel they're realistic and achievable? So you're kind of saying, okay, it doesn't look like the government's listened to that big piece of advice not to apply this to the student sector. Therefore, we think that this is more realistic, and we're likely to get it, and it'll make life better.
Yes, thanks, Nick. Essentially, yes. I sort of touched on the PBSA side of things. So essentially, if we were going to be calling for an exemption to off-street student accommodation, what that would be requiring is effectively a pretty close to full rewrite of the bill. Also amendments to the Housing Act 1988, and potentially a whole raft of other secondary legislation as well. And we simply have taken a kind of more pragmatic approach to this. We don't think that that calling for an exemption for students is likely to materialise, as disappointing as that may be. And really the thinking is, I suppose we're mindful really that we've got very little time for this bill to receive royal assent before a general election is on the cards. And what we're trying to do is achieve a workable but realistic balance and get something in place before, in all likelihood, a Labour government is in power, because a renters reform bill under a Labour government will look significantly worse, I'm afraid. So yeah.
So is it fair to say there's a healthy degree of sort of pragmatism in this approach?
There is, and I this is something that we've had a lot of discussion internally with our members and across the sector. And I mean, I think, as I said, nobody can argue that this is a panacea. This is not a solution to losing fixed term tenancies, I'm afraid. We're trying to in the having a 2-month notice ground. What we're trying to achieve there is as near as possible to a fixed term as we can get in terms of possession. And the moratorium does try to get some certainty in terms of a minimum tenancy. But yes, it I'm afraid will not stop tenants from being able to leave a tenancy after that 6 months if we get the moratorium. And therefore it doesn't guarantee, it's not a guaranteed income through the year, I'm afraid.
Okay, so it kind of mitigates the impact, but yeah, understood. And then I think one of the kind of themes has come up. So we had a few questions about what can people do. So what action can our landlords take, and what can accommodation for students do to support you in this? Is it about really sending the letters, or is there more that people can do?
I think at this point, sending the letter, I know that seems like a not the most impactful thing, but actually it really is, because where we are at the moment with the bill, as I said, we haven't got a second reading at the moment. Until we get sight of the proposed amendments, we are slightly guessing as to what's going to be proposed. So the more people that can highlight the concerns, the problems, you know, the increased risk of the bill, the better. You know, your MP is you know, duty bound to respond. The more MPs that are aware of this, the better. We're obviously targeting key people and having conversations with you know, key members of Parliament on this. But initially, I would really encourage everybody to sign the letter, or at least have a look at them and edit them as you wish. In terms of other things, really, it's I suppose if you're an NRLA member, give us your feedback, tell us your stories. You know, again, the more people that we hear from, the better on this. It's an issue that, you know, we're getting a lot of feedback on, and I fully understand that, you know, a lot of student landlords are very concerned by this and not necessarily happy with the approach that we're taking. So by all means, give us your feedback. You can see the email address there, and please, you know, get in touch. But yeah, until we get a date for a second reading, and I should add that before that, the government is overdue a response to the Levelling Up Housing and Communities Committee report on the private rented sector. So that is the sort of next big thing that we're anticipating, I suppose. That will give us hopefully a steer on where the government is thinking in terms of amendments. And I suppose we'll be in a slightly clearer position then once we've got that, as to, you know, where we're going on it. We are pretty confident, I think, that we will get a ground, but the devil is in the detail. So until we see exactly what's being proposed, we're kind of remaining cautious on this. But I think there is an indication, certainly, that the government they certainly know they need to do something. There needs to be an amendment, and I think the ground is the most likely one. But clearly we need the ground and some to make this workable. So yeah, it is a bit of a watch this space at the moment.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions come in, and I'm trying not to put you too much on the spot, but one of the, so please just tell me if it's something that we need to take away. But in terms of joint tenancies, I know that that's something that really vexes our landlords. So, you know, I think as we understand it, you know, if this is a joint tenancy and one student serves notice, does that effectively end the whole thing for everybody? And is that something, you know, you're talking to government about?
Yes, it is. So your understanding is correct. In legal terms, if one tenant ends the tenancy, it will end for all. Our thinking on that, I think, is really around, given the shortage of student accommodation, if you've got 6 students in a property and one gives notice, those other 5 are not necessarily going to be wanting to be chucked out or made homeless. So I think the thinking is, in practice, either the onus will be on those 5 to replace that student, or, as I've said, a landlord will be faced with a void. Our thinking around that in terms of how the ground might work is, we are working on a basis that although in legal terms the tenancy would end if a student left, a deed of assignment or a follow-on tenancy might be the kind of practical way of dealing with this, so that a void could be filled, but the ground and the moratorium periods would sort of effectively stay in place. So we haven't necessarily nailed this down, but for instance, if the ground, the landlord ground for possession, if, say, that could be served, you know, 6 months in, 9 months in, whatever period of time into a tenancy, if you've had a change of tenant, that would be a follow-on tenancy. So the ground could still be used. What we don't want is tenancies ending, new tenancies starting, and then whatever ground we get to be you know, unusable. So I think we're lobbying quite hard for well, an amendment around that, really, that it allows a ground to be usable even if there has been a change to the tenancy. Does that clarify things a little bit? It's certainly not something that I don't think we have a kind of an answer, a definitive answer on, but that's our thinking around it.
Okay, thank you. So there's quite a lot of questions that come in as well. So I think so again, this may stray into sort of legal territory. So please just let me know if you think it does. I think it also annoys quite a lot of landlords that PBSAs are effectively exempt. So I think one of the areas of thinking is landlords are wondering whether, you know, there is any grounds for them to be sort of effectively categorised as a PBSA. Is there anything or any advice that you can give, or any sort of areas that can be looked into, do you think?
So we did have some early discussions around that, in a sense, really around codes of conduct. So most PBSA, as I understand it, is subject to, you know, a particular code of practice, and we did have discussions around whether that could be applied to the off-street student market. I don't think that was necessarily going to be taken forward. So in terms of that, no. However, as I said, the PBSA operates on the kind of licensing, on a license. We don't think we're going to, well, we're very sceptical that we will get any kind of exemption from the Renters Reform Bill for student accommodation for the PRS, simply because of the scale of the redrafting that will be required for the bill and the Housing Act, as I said. I think, I suppose that the a way around that would be operating on licenses, but that is clearly not in the spirit of the bill. That, you know, whilst I don't think there's anything in law to stop landlords entering into licenses, you know, there is going to be no sort of other exemption to align it with the PBSA regime. What we're calling for is really is a parity of outcomes with PBSA. So trying to just ensure that the mechanisms we've got in place, so the ground, the moratorium, and anything else we can get, is as close to the operation of the PBSA as we can. So yeah, I think the short answer is no. I think I don't think there's any way that we can align the two, as far as I'm aware. At least that's kind of current thinking.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you. And in terms of, I mean, I think you hinted at a degree of confidence, you know, that you might be able to get those sort of amendments or suggestions. Does that, you know, I think people are kind of curious to understand the, you know, how confident really.
I would not like to put sort of money on it, I suppose, but we're certainly getting positive feedback on the ground. I would say it is more than likely that we will get a ground for possession, but what we don't know is how tight or how you know, what the parameters around that will be. The last roundtable, the last government roundtable, there was certainly agreement in the room that that's what we needed. So government have heard from all sides, from us, from, you know, from the landlord side, from the student side, that a ground for possession is needed. Otherwise, you know, the risks will simply be too high. Landlords will leave and you know, go into short-term lets or professional sharers or you know, other areas of the market, or just sell altogether. So the government is very clear that they do need to provide a solution, and I think the ground and an amendment is the neatest one from their point of view, and it's the one that will give the greatest or the least worst outcome for landlords at this point. So yeah, I would say we're pretty confident. We will be surprised if come second reading we haven't got an amendment that provides for a ground.
Okay, super. Okay, and I think that there is a lot of questions around similar sort of theme. So I think we've answered most of those themes, which is great. There was a question around this sort of portal for landlord information, which is a bit around that sort of. Can you give us a little bit of information on what you anticipate happening there, and what the next steps are with that?
Sure. So the bill provides powers to introduce a portal, but the bill doesn't give any clarity at all on what the portal will look like, when it might be implemented, and how it will exactly operate. So it is very lacking in detail. We are our kind of main concern around it is obviously the cost to landlords, if it introduces any extra bureaucracy at all, and really, and most significantly, questioning the need for a portal alongside licensing schemes. So our concern really is we're not against the introduction of a portal, but we do not want a portal plus licensing. We think it could be a useful tool for compliant landlords to evidence their compliance. If you can upload all your documentation to that portal, great. But in terms of what will actually be required and the kind of timeframes on that, there is no clarity whatsoever as far as I'm aware. There's certainly nothing in the bill. So yeah, I'm afraid that's probably as much as I can say on that one.
Okay, good stuff. So Ellie, I do want to let you go, but I have had one more question in, and it's someone saying, could you just explain to us again what the grounds for possession amendment will actually do, or the intention of it? I think just looking for a little bit drill down clarity exactly what that's going to do.
Sure. So the one that we're proposing, so this isn't in the bill at all. So our proposal is that it would be a mandatory ground. It would be a ground available to any landlord who has, in the preceding 12 months, so i.e. in the sort of current academic year, if you will, let to students. It would be a two months notice, and our thinking really is around that notice could be served at the end of the academic year to guarantee possession come the following year. So without that, what you will have is a situation where a landlord has no certainty at all that tenants will vacate. So our understanding is that landlords are letting property as early as the November before the following academic year, and clearly that's not going to be possible if you have no way of ensuring that your property is going to be available the following year. So that ground is the absolute kind of red line, I suppose, in the sand. We need that, and that's the one that I've indicated we're pretty certain that we're going to get. What we haven't sort of nailed down is when that could be served, and that's what we're talking to government really about now. I suppose that the complicating factors around that are, we're aware that landlords and by necessity start their tenancies at different times. So some start in September, some start in July. So we need the ground to be functional to every case, or as many possible circumstances as we can. So we're just trying to be really careful around the wording of that ground so that it can be used by as many student landlords as possible. But effectively, it is akin to a mandatory 2 months notice, provided that property is going to be relet to students. So it would be on the basis that you are reletting it to students. We also want to be really clear that that can be served to non-students who have perhaps filled a room in the property. So it's not it's a student ground, but it's not a ground that can only be served to students. I should add that there is also, so I know there's been a lot of concern from our members around refurbishments and whether this has an impact on summer refurbishments. There is in the bill proposed a slight amendment to ground 6, which is the refurbishment or redevelopment ground. And I perhaps shouldn't say this because the government may not have properly thought this through, but that refurbishment ground, as it stands in the bill, can be served it's a 2-month mandatory notice, and it can be served at any point after 6 months of a tenancy. So that absolutely doesn't help students in any way at all. But from a landlord point of view, if you've got concerns around refurbishments, there is that option available to you as well. So it's the 2-month ground that we're proposing. If that doesn't provide sufficient time for the scale of refurbishments you need, then ground 6, the amendments to ground 6 would hopefully afford that, but clearly not ideal for your student tenants.
Understood. So I think in practical terms, the idea would be that, say, in May, a landlord could serve notice to their students so that they could get possession back of the property in July, which would often be a sort of typical handover period. And then on top of that, the ideal is, well, where you are at the minute, that a student that moved in say September couldn't serve notice for 4 months, which means that they will be in a minimum till February. So that what you're doing there is mitigating that really big risk in terms of the challenge.
That's it, exactly. I think the thinking on the moratorium, that 4+2, giving you the 6 months, is really that, again, in our understanding, in the work we've done, the likelihood of a student dropping out or leaving is sort of higher in that first part of the year. So the longer we can kind of keep them in the tenancy, the more likely it is that they'll stay. It clearly doesn't get around the fact that, if a student knows they're finishing their exams in May, they can serve notice, earlier to coincide with their effective end of term. But what we've been quite clear on is, in all our discussions, our argument has been that we need mechanisms in place that allow the alignment with the academic year. So we're really clear that anything we're proposing needs to align with the start of the year and needs to ensure that we can kind of finish in line with the end of the academic year. So I think I would just caveat the point around serving notice in May. I think we may end up in a situation where that notice couldn't expire before the end of the academic year, just because we wouldn't want to be allowing landlords to sort of serve notice to end midway through tenants' exams or something like that. So there might be some wording around that.
I see.
But as I said, if you need to gain possession for, say, redevelopment or refurbishment purposes, then there is that other ground you can use if you need it to.
Okay, good stuff. And then finally, then some paperwork potentially in place which would protect that joint tenancy if 5 of the 6 students wanted to stay. There's something there that we think we're going to get that makes that joint tenancy more workable.
I think the government will want a pragmatic and sort of practical approach on this. So I don't know, I don't have answers for you on that particular point, other than what they will not want is 1 tenant leaves and 5 students are homeless. So they are wanting some practical arrangement in place. So I think our thinking is that and I would absolutely welcome your feedback on this, is that we are looking for a sort of follow-on tenancy there. So you retain your 5 tenants. You may have an empty room, and that is going to be a difficult decision in how that's managed, whether you can find a student replacement or whether you do need to look at an alternative, or it's a cost. I mean, we're very clear to government that the impact of this is going to increase rents for students because there is this increased risk. So that will be a factor. But yeah, the difficult decision there for landlords is going to be really around how they fill that void. I appreciate, and that's where the issue around the ground becomes more important. If you're filling that void with a non-student, we just need to be really clear that we can still get the property back in September if you need it.
Yeah, I think it's also what you said there is quite hard, and the fact that government are concerned about it. I think earlier in the year, I think our worry was that they didn't seem particularly to have appreciated that potential difficulty. So I think that's really heartening. So I think we've had you now for 50 minutes, and I'm going to let you go. I just wanted to say thank you ever so much for giving us your time. I really appreciate it. I know it's a really busy time for you guys. And thanks for the work that's been done so far, we are very supportive, and we do hope that you know, we can get something workable.
Thank you. No, I'm really glad to be here. And as I said, please, you know, if you've got questions or concerns around it, we'll be very keen to hear them.
Yeah. So
right, about yourself.
Next steps. Oh, Simon, can you put yourself on mute? Next steps for us. We will share this widely. So among all our landlords, Ellie, we will. If you can send us a copy of the slides, we'll share those.
Absolutely.
As well.
Yeah.
So what I will do is I'll follow up with all of the attendees and get some feedback. So all of the feedback, and send it on to you, so you've got an idea of what that is, and we'll probably do a wider survey as well. And then I think we'll pick up the bits where you're saying, okay, this is how we can best help, and just really try and support that. I've also been told by, you know, pretty much everyone I've spoken to, that the more that we write to our MPs, just the volume of activity, it can work. So I think just to reinforce that. But yeah, I just want to say thanks so much for your time, and I appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thanks very much.
Bye for now.